The strange but true story featured on this podcast contains details some people may find distressing. Listener discretion is advised. I'm Chaya Samuel, and things are about to get weird. Hi friends, thank you so much for joining me for episode 83 of Things Are About to Get Weird. Now, doing this podcast, I spend a huge amount of time looking into all kinds of strange but true stories. And while some make the cut for the show, there are a lot I end up having to pass on. But every now and again, something figuratively lands on my desk that is so unique that I instantly know it's going to have to be the focus of a future episode. And the case known as the Gullspång Miracle is one of those tales. I was first made aware of the story by one of our brilliant listeners, Ali, and today is finally the day that I share the bizarre twists and turns of this strange series of events with you all. Before we begin, a warning that this episode does feature mentions of a person possibly taking their own life, as well as the loss of a baby too, so do keep that in mind before choosing to listen. That said, let's get this episode started. For someone who creates any kind of media about exceptional real-life stories, be it a podcaster, a TV producer, or a filmmaker, the concept of someone coming directly to you with a truly standout tale to tell is kind of the dream. But for the Swedish documentary maker Maria Fredriksson, this scenario very much became a reality in the late 2010s, when Maria received a phone call, or technically a voicemail, from two older ladies, Norwegian sisters Kari and May. The siblings informed Maria that they had a genuinely amazing story to share and wanted her help to turn the events that had recently taken place within their family into a documentary film. The sisters were now living in Sweden, and they'd been given Maria's phone number by SVT, which is the Swedish national broadcaster. What they described to her on that phone call was intriguing enough for Maria to decide to pay Kari and May a visit, so she travelled to the locality of Gullspång in the south of Sweden to hear more about their tale in person. Allow me to explain what the sisters revealed. The saga begins in a fairly unlikely place, within a large blue boat in the shape of a whale at an amusement park. During a visit that May had paid to Kari in Gullspång, the sisters decided to visit the local attraction and opted to have a go on a water ride which involved sitting in a big plastic whale-shaped boat and heading down a large waterfall-style drop. As they hit the bottom of the drop, May knew that something wasn't quite right. She was in an enormous amount of pain, and after seeking medical attention, it was confirmed that she had fractured her tailbone, which must have been absolutely excruciating. Throughout her recovery, she wasn't able to sit down, let alone travel back to Norway, and it was decided that May should stay in Sweden with Kari to rest and recover. Now, when you watch May and Kari speak, it does make you smile because you can just tell they're sisters. They kind of contradict one another and aren't afraid to say, no, that's not right. And that's just what happens when this next event is discussed. Kari explains that after a while, May decided she actually wanted to look for a place of her own in Gullspång, though May counters that she was actually more interested in shopping for artwork to eventually put into a home than for the home itself. Nevertheless, the pair ended up going for a viewing at an apartment, and this would prove to be a very significant decision. As May stood in the kitchen of the property, she was taking in the space when she noticed something on one of the walls, or more accurately, three somethings. Paintings, one large one in the middle with a smaller piece on each side. The sight took May aback, and she called Kari into the kitchen to observe it too. The artwork, which featured bowls of fruit, had been exactly what May had been picturing and describing wanting in her future home. She knew at that moment that she had to take the apartment. And it's here that we arrive at a crucial piece of information within the wider context of the story. Kari and May are both very religious ladies. They're very devoted to their Christian faith. When they saw the 3 paintings, and they were just so similar to the ones Mai had envisioned herself owning in her mind, the sisters took this as a spiritual sign that this was the apartment they'd been destined to find, as they believed the artwork represented the Holy Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Making a somewhat spontaneous decision, Mai told the estate agent that she wanted to buy the property, and the process of making this significant purchase was then set into motion. Around a month later, the sisters headed to the estate agent's office in order to meet the seller and sign some necessary paperwork, and it was at this moment that their lives were changed forever. As they sat down across from the apartment's current owner, Olaug, Mai and Kari became transfixed by the woman who was looking back at them. The way they were staring at Olaug was intense, and sensing that she was picking up on their unusual reaction, the sisters simply had to verbalize what was on their minds. In an apologetic tone, they told Olaug that the reason for their strange demeanors was that she was the absolute living double of their late half-sister Astrid, who was also known as Lita. Now, when I first read about this story before I watched the documentary, I had never seen a side-by-side of Olaug and Lita, and when I finally did see footage of both of the women in sequence, I was completely shocked at just how similar they really are. But whilst this was amazing for Mai and Kari to see someone who resembled their sister so vividly, I can only imagine that the encounter was also tainted with sadness. Tragically, around 3 decades earlier, on the 29th of July 1988, their family had been informed by police that it appeared Lita had taken her own life. Based on the scene, it appeared that she had taken an overdose of medication, possibly after her involvement in an embezzlement scheme at her place of work had been discovered. This news was unbearably difficult and painful for the family to hear, and the aftermath of their older sister's death was equally distressing too. As I mentioned, Mai and Kari are from a very religious background, and they soon found that due to the nature in which Lita was believed to have passed away, the attitudes of some of those around them were shocking to say the least, including those in the church. Kari recalls that she was never allowed to see Lita's body before she was buried. The hospital told her to ask the church minister before her burial, and when she did so, he simply replied, quote, "If it were up to me, I would not have let her be buried on hallowed ground," which must have been devastating for them to hear. Hearing Kari speak, you definitely get the sense that she didn't feel a proper sense of closure about Lita's death. It's honestly heartbreaking to see. And of course, this could play a factor in the strength of the sisters' reaction when they came face to face with Olaug, especially when they discovered that the similarities between her and Lita didn't end at their physical appearances. Mai and Kari asked Olaug when she was born, and she responded by saying the 9th of February 1941. In what I can only imagine was sheer disbelief, the sisters then revealed that this was the exact same date that Lita had been born. But the tables were about to turn. Upon hearing this, Olaug stopped in her tracks, asking, "Wait, what did you say her name was?" The sisters confirmed that Lita was the nickname their elder sibling went by, before Olaug made the third shocking revelation of the day. Lita was also the name she had gone by until she was around 18 or 20 years old. Can you even imagine how it must have felt to be any one of those 3 women sat in that room that day? Naturally, they all wanted to know more about one another, and to try and make some sense of what on earth was going on. So they began to dig into Olaug's past for any clues that could help to explain this mind-boggling situation. Olaug explained that she grew up in the north of Norway, virtually on the other side of a mountain range to where Mai, Kari, Lita and their other siblings had lived, and had a very happy childhood with parents who loved her. But she also explained that she had always had this sense that something was missing, and she could never put her finger on exactly what that thing was. Interestingly, Lita had also spoken of experiencing a similar feeling in her life, something she only spoke about shortly before she passed away. Now, with all of this extraordinary information that had come to light, Olaug had started to wonder whether there really was a big missing puzzle piece to her life that she had no knowledge of, and she decided to ask a cousin of hers who was into genealogy to help not only her but also May and Kari uncover the truth. Within days, Olaug's cousin had news for her, the kind of news a person has to be sitting down for. He had found out that Olaug had been born a twin and was placed for adoption shortly after being born. She had grown up with absolutely no clue that she wasn't her parents' biological child, and discovering this information was really quite distressing for her. It left her feeling as though she had no idea who she was, but what she did gain from the revelation was May and Kari, these two strangers who were now convinced she was their long-lost half-sister. Though Olaug was starting to come around to the idea, she also felt that a DNA test would help her to fully accept this strange new circumstance she found herself in. And when the results came back, it showed that she was indeed the half-sister of Kari and May, with different mothers but the same father, obviously just like with her twin Lita. Now let's just think about this for a moment. What are the statistical chances that these three women, all from Norway, would come together in these very specific circumstances in a different country, in this tiny Swedish locality 1,000 miles from home, and end up realizing that they were secret siblings? You can suddenly understand why the case has been referred to as the Gullspång Miracle. It really is out of this world. So you might be thinking, well, that's the end of the story, right? Perhaps the birth of the twins was a shock, and the family knew that they couldn't support two children, so placed one for adoption in the hope that she'd have a better life. And maybe that the stars had aligned to bring all three women together as a sort of gift from the universe in their older age. That has to be it. There can't be any further twists or turns, can there? As it turns out, this tale was far from over. In fact, you could argue that it was only just beginning. Now, the next wild turn in this story comes courtesy of the possible explanation about why the twins had been separated at birth. The year before they were born, in April of 1940, towards the start of World War II, Norway was actually invaded by Nazi Germany, and one of the more unexpected consequences of this were that the parents of twins within invaded nations had to become incredibly careful, often resorting to hiding their children away, as it's known that certain Nazi doctors sought out twins in order to conduct research experiments on them. It's suggested that this is the reason that Olaug was placed into the foster system after being born, and possibly also why the truth was never told to either twin throughout their lives. That's not to say that no one knew that Lita had been a twin though. Her former nanny appears in the documentary at one point and speaks about how she was told that the first twin had been stillborn. This entire situation is so sad for so many reasons, but the result was that none of the children in either Lita's biological family or Olaug's adoptive family knew all of the facts about their birth. When I first heard about this, my theory was that it was probably the two families' ways of protecting the girls, at least initially. But you can tell that Olaug is really struggling with some of the information that's coming out about the circumstances around her adoption. It must have been incredibly difficult to hear about at times. One more heartwarming moment is when Olaug actually ends up meeting Lita's daughter, her niece, Trina, with Lita passing away so young and so tragically, I can only imagine that it was an unbelievably moving moment for both women, but particularly for Trina, and I think that comes across in the footage of their meeting. As time goes on, so many little similarities between Olaug and Lita become apparent, from their physical mannerisms to the appearances of the men they had ended up marrying. However, these more wholesome moments within the tale start to become far less frequent, and it begins to become clear that there are more than just a few differences between Olaug and this newfound biological family of hers. The cracks first start to show during a visit between herself and Kari and May's other siblings, along with their adult children. You can sense a bit of awkwardness between them in terms of how they interact, and in a private interview, Olaug actually tells Maria, the documentary maker, that they simply don't think alike. They're very different and their thoughts aren't necessarily compatible. It seems that a big factor in this is that May and Kari and their family are all very religious, whereas Olaug isn't and appears to be more to the point and logical. And when you find out that she previously held the rank of lieutenant in the armed forces, her very sensible personality makes a lot of sense. Like Lita, Olaug is the only one in the family she grew up in who wasn't religious. On the other hand, May and Kari are very quick to attribute almost everything in life to being the work of God. It's quite clear that it's an absolutely enormous part of both of their lives, and it's this key difference that seems to be a trigger behind what happens next. Now, as I noted, it was always the belief of the police and then the family that Lita took her own life, following the discovery of her involvement in that embezzlement scandal I referenced earlier. But the more connected Olaug starts to feel to her late twin, and the more she learns about her, she begins to question how the authorities arrived at this conclusion. To help answer some of her queries, she contacts the local police and asks to see the report that was filed about Lita's death, and what she uncovers is troubling. Whilst the family had always been told that she had died by her own hand, the report completely contradicts this. Although there were apparently medicine bottles found near to her lifeless body, which was discovered face down near a lake, no traces of any drugs showed up in her autopsy. Instead, what was actually recorded is that she likely died of heart failure, and this is where things start to become even more strained between the newfound sisters. Whilst Kari and May are incredibly relieved to find out that Lita did not take her own life, largely because of their own religious beliefs, which we previously saw echoed by the minister at her funeral, the overwhelming emotion felt by Olaug was suspicion. The circumstances surrounding her secret twin's death just didn't sit right with her. She speaks out about the details that feel odd, like the fact that Lita was found face down by the water, with her shoes missing, and that her clothing was covered in strange grass stains, almost as though she could have been dragged there. After reviewing all of the information she could get her hands on, she finally vocalized her true belief that Lita had actually been murdered, and it immediately becomes apparent that May and Kari are not pleased about this speculation. When the sisters had learned that Lita's cause of death had been recorded as natural causes, it very much felt like they wanted to leave it at that and draw a line under it. But referencing her education and many years spent working in the armed forces, Olaug was convinced that she was truly onto something in her suspicion that Lita had met with foul play, and you can just see the two parties becoming incredibly frustrated with each other as time passes. Kari and May want to leave the case be, and seem to be starting to resent the fact that Olaug is so different from the twin of hers that they knew and loved, whereas Olaug is exasperated by their lack of drive to find out the truth, and the fact that their religious devotion seems to block them in this respect. Plus, she alleges that the family have all tried to convert her to Christianity, which did not go over very well at all. By the point that Olaug is pushing for the case to be re-examined, May, in particular, seems to have developed the view that she is a snake or a troublemaker of sorts, and it's sad to see the speed at which the situation appears to deteriorate. Meetings between Olaug and the family start to become incredibly tense. It's abundantly clear that she is very different to them in many ways, and although Kari shows herself to be more upset than anything else that the relationship isn't thriving, May and some of the other family members seem almost hostile towards her, which appears to be reciprocated. Following a particularly frosty interaction with her siblings, Olaug travels home to Norway and appears to be feeling some kind of regret about the twist her life had ended up taking, saying out loud that from an emotional perspective, she would prefer that these people she was now involved with weren't her family at all. You can just tell that she feels like a complete outsider with them, utterly at odds with them in so many ways, and this sensation is unsettling her so much that she feels the urge to double check that their familial connection is 100% real. To do this, she makes a request, asking May, Kari, and Lita's daughter Trina to undergo a second DNA test. Now, although the timelines aren't made explicitly clear within the documentary itself, Maria Fredriksson has spoken in interviews about the fact the film took her 5 years to make, so it was filmed over a considerable period of time, and by the time the 4 women are in the clinic having their blood drawn for the DNA test, you can tell that some time has passed, especially because the family's views on Olaug's theory that Lita's death may have been suspicious seem to have softened. It's revealed that before she died, Lita had taken out 3 different life insurance policies, and Kari in particular seems to be questioning why she may have done this. Did she feel unsafe? Was it something to do with the embezzlement case? Or something involving her personal life? The fact that Lita did pass away so close to the time she took out the final policy seemed to have stirred something up in Kari. And when the time comes to review the results of the second DNA test, it's the trio of Olaug, Kari, and Trina who gather together to open up the documents, and the vibe of their meeting feels somewhat more positive until the results are declared. After opening the letter, Trina starts to read out the information within, and in one of the most bizarre twists I have come across in a case for years, it's revealed that Olaug is in fact not the half-sister of Kari and May. I know, this is genuinely baffling. When Trina relays this information, Olaug is visibly stunned. Her head tilts back and she hardly says a word. Trina then goes on to share that the test also proved that the possibility of Olaug being her aunt is only around 0.02%. So they are not related. What happens after this is so weird. At first, the 3 women seem to be very matter-of-fact about this huge bombshell, possibly because there's a bit of relief at play, but the documentary maker, Maria, is having none of it. She begins to question why their reactions are so accepting, expressing that she finds it personally upsetting that they've come this far within their story for this to all be brushed off so easily. And to my mind, I think it's because they're all so baffled that they don't quite know what to do. The fact of the matter is that Olaug is astonishingly similar to Lita in so many ways. All of the details fit perfectly, even down to their birth date. And you can tell that both Kari and Trina have not really accepted the DNA test results in their hearts, and still believe deep down that they are related to Olaug. And you know, I completely get it. From all of the footage we see of Lita, Olaug looks every inch her twin. It all fits fits, yet this incredibly professional, formal DNA test says otherwise. From what the footage showed, it looked like the first test was one of those cheek swab ones that you send off. But still, what are the chances that it would be so wrong? It's honestly almost infuriating to see it all unfold. So after all of this, I think it's safe to say that the tale known as the Gullspång Miracle should probably be more aptly titled the Gullspång Mystery. Not only do we have 2 DNA tests, one showing that Olaug is related to the family and the other seemingly disproving this, but we now also have a huge amount of conflicting information about how Lita really died. More strange information about this second mystery continues to emerge, with eyewitness accounts disputing the timeline of her passing and suggesting that she had perhaps been at the lakeside spot for some time in her car, waiting for an unknown person, possibly for as long as 2 days before she died. One witness even implies that Lita may have changed her hair colour during these couple of days, which is another bizarre detail. And if all of this wasn't odd enough, things start to become plain weird. Weird enough that I found myself questioning whether any of this was even real, because it can't get any stranger. As Kari and May are sat with the film crew speaking about these unanswered questions around their sister's death, the filmmaker Maria stands up off camera to make some kind of technical adjustment, and all of a sudden there's this huge crash and the lighting completely shuts off. We then see that a large ceiling light has fallen down directly where Maria had been positioned seconds before. It's honestly just an eerie moment in a documentary that has already taken such a dark turn. As for the discrepancies in the DNA tests, well, it just doesn't make any sense to me. Some of the family members have spoken about their theories that Olaug could have somehow cheated or tampered with the second test, as she clearly hoped she wasn't related to them. But when you see them at the clinic getting the test done, I just don't see how that's possible. Something I wondered was whether it could have been that Olaug and Lita really were twins, but that they just didn't actually share the same father with their half-sisters, May and Kari, as we already know that they had different mothers. But this wouldn't fit with the fact that Lita's daughter was found to have such a low possibility of being related to Olaug too. It's just mind-bending. I do not understand what is happening here. Now, of course, I have tried my best to find out whether any further details about this story have been reported since the release of the documentary, and it's been impossible to find anything at all. As far as I know, there's been no further progress made in terms of the investigation into Lita's death. It looks like it remains officially concluded, which is probably because the family ultimately seem to have decided to let things remain as they are. One thing I did want to say is that I know that a lot of this episode was based on the Gullspång Miracle documentary, which is not the norm for how I usually do my research for the podcast. I always love to refer to as many sources as possible, but to me, that's one of the reasons why this tale is just so strange. It's very unusual to have really only one proper source for a story like this, apart from a few of the other things I've noted throughout this episode, like that interview with Maria Fredriksson and a couple of short articles. There's just nothing else out there about the people in this tale. They're almost like enigmas, all of them, and this is only highlighted by the very last scene in the film before the credits, where we hear a voicemail left by Olaug for the filmmaker Maria, where she suggests that perhaps they should take a DNA test and see if they're related. I took this as kind of a dark joke, but with how odd the events in this case are, I honestly don't know what's real and what isn't anymore. anymore. With the number of twists this story takes, it left me with far more questions than it did answers. So if you're feeling that too right now, you're definitely not alone. I'm usually relatively optimistic in unsolved cases when it comes to the chance of finally receiving answers one day, but in this situation it kind of feels like the book is closed, unless something changes. And in a story as strange as this, for all we know, the next wild turn could very well be just around the corner. Oh my goodness, does anyone else feel a little bit bamboozled right now? Honestly, my interpretation and retelling of the case is one thing, but if you're intrigued, I can't tell you how much I'd recommend watching the full Gullspång Miracle documentary. I watched it on BBC iPlayer, but I'm sure it's available elsewhere too. If you can believe it, it's even more odd when you see everything visualized. What on earth do you make of this story? Do you think something went wrong with the DNA tests? And do you believe a deeper look into Lita's death should be formally undertaken? I'd be fascinated to hear your theories and opinions. And if you do check out the documentary, please let me know what you thought of it. I have not been able to get this case out of my head since I started looking into it. It's genuinely driving me round the bend. I very much look forward to reading your comments. But before all of that, we still have our outro feature to go. So let's keep the recommendations flowing with this week's Weird Media. Now this was completely unplanned, but I'm actually sticking with the documentary theme for this week's Weird Media shoutout, because at the weekend I decided to watch the show that everyone's been talking about, which is of course Louis Theroux's new Netflix special, Inside the Manosphere. Now I have been a Louis Theroux fan for longer than I can remember. He's actually one of the main reasons I decided to study broadcast journalism at university, and when I found out that he was tackling this incredibly controversial subject, I knew it was going to make for compelling viewing, but I had no idea how wild of a ride the documentary would be. So I did know a little bit about this huge rise in this very misogynistic manosphere or red pill content being created by men around the world. But before watching the show, I honestly had no idea just how widespread and deep it had become. I would say that I was a mixture of shocked and outraged at different times throughout the documentary, but because of the incredibly unique way that Louis Theroux is able to get under the skin of the people he's interviewing, I also thought it was incredibly revealing too. I was a little bit hesitant to view it just before pressing play, as I knew it was going to be a difficult watch. And although I was correct, it was also quite brilliant thanks to Louis himself. He was able to highlight perfectly in that very special way that he does just how hypocritical and short-sighted the men creating this content really are. And I truly don't think anyone could watch the piece and think that he was in any way promoting or excusing the behaviour of these men. He let them expose themselves in a way, just by the way he posed certain questions. And if you're familiar with Louis Theroux's style, you'll know exactly what I mean. If you're planning on watching Inside the Manosphere, I would say to be aware that it is a tough watch, but one that I think is very important. And also to remember that as rough as it seems, there are still lots of good people out there in the world, many more good than bad, I believe. So don't let it get to you too much. I'll be very interested to see whether this is a subject that Louis ends up revisiting, although I have a feeling that he won't be welcomed back into that community with open arms anytime soon. A massive thank you for joining me on the podcast today. It's wonderful to have you here. In the show notes or description box, I'll be including shout outs and links to the sources I used during my research. And as I say, I would definitely check out the full Gullspång Miracle film for even more strange details. I'll also be listing all of our social media pages and our email address too. Please do leave us a comment if you're listening on Spotify, or get in touch on Instagram, Threads, Facebook, or even TikTok, and let me know what you make of this case. If you have a spare moment, a quick rating or review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts is always hugely appreciated. It's such an amazing, free way to support the show. And if you're watching on YouTube, please feel free to subscribe and give this video a thumbs up. Thank you once again for joining me today, and I'll be back again next week with a brand new strange but true story to tell you. So until next time, take care of yourself and others and keep it weird, but the good kind of weird.